Good morning and welcome to Tuesday, the 13th of August. And so today we are going to look at Exodus chapter 16, so go ahead and read it on your own. And it's a provision of manna and quail for the children of Israel. So at this point in the story, in Exodus 16, it is now 1 month that they have left Egypt. So they are 1 month into trial. So maybe at this point, their high of their mountaintop experience of being delivered is maybe starting to wane a little bit, right? It's hot in the desert. They keep stopping, and then they pack up, and then they keep walking. And so also at this point, their supplies that they brought from Egypt probably started to run out. And we know in the first 3 days, it seemed like they ran out of their supply of water, and then God provided for them. But any food that they had brought, maybe they had brought some like dried figs or grapes or flour or meal or cornmeal or whatever they had brought, or maybe some vegetables from the garden, it's probably all gone. And so they aren't even at the point of starving here, but they're starting to be the point of worrying. Maybe they're a little hungry because their provisions are low, so they're maybe trying to ration it out. And so this is where they start complaining. So they even wait. It's not like that God, not like they're starving to death, right? Instead of waiting on God's provision and sustenance, they're complaining that how great it was. Maybe it would have been better if they had stayed in Egypt. And what they're trying to do is they went from complaining pretty fast, right? And sometimes when you're complaining, you only remember the good times. And so they only thought of the good times. They're like, wow, we had pots of meat and we had all this food and now we're going to die, right? So they were already planning like they're dying, but they're not starving yet. They still have some food. And so that's what happens lots of times with people who complain. Is you hear people go, oh, we had it so much better at that other church or my other job or that other city that we lived in or that other, and they forget, wow, it was really hot there and there was a lot of bugs or all this stuff, or that job was really hard and you complained all the time or whatever. And that's so often that our heart is when we reach a hard, difficult time, we complain and we compare and we bring out things that maybe weren't as good as we thought, but we're like, oh, we longed for that. It was way better than it is now. And again, I had mentioned this before, but at this point, me and some scholars believe that I don't really think that people of Israel were so much praying or desired to go back to Canaan. Because they didn't know Canaan. Canaan was scary, right? None of them had been to Canaan. None of their generations and generations hadn't been to Canaan. They know that Canaan is inhabited with lots of people. So to them, it's not that they really wanted to leave Egypt. They really just wanted life to be better in Egypt. They were content being slaves just as long as it wasn't as bad. Maybe if they took away the slave masters and they weren't whipped or they weren't beat or they had like a fair wage, they would have liked that better than having to go through the wilderness to this promised land that they don't really understand or have seen. So just think about that. Sometimes we're content with being slaves to our sin because we're familiar with it. We maybe want a little bit better. We don't want the consequences so much, but we don't really want deliverance from it. So think about that. So they started to complain, and then so God gives them instructions. He says, I'm going to provide you food. And so there was specific instruction in the food. This food was going to come down and they had to go out and gather it. And so they had to go do work. They had to go get this food out. It wasn't just dropped onto their mouths and their tongues, right? And they could gather a day's worth, which many scholars think it was like a cup. And so, it turned into like they could make things into it, right? They could make loaves and stuff, or pancakes. So they couldn't take more than what they needed for that day. They could only do that on the sixth day. So the other thing that I didn't realize this in reading before, that it would melt. It would melt in the heat of the day. So that means you had to get up and you got to go work, right? God was already instilling in them a work ethic. And that's like all these things that we're going to see is God is teaching these people how to be a nation. And so that's one of the first things they had to do. They had to get up and work. They couldn't just like sleep in and go get their manna at 3 p.m. because it would be gone. And the other thing is they couldn't keep extra because that extra turned to bad. They had to trust that God would provide for the next day. So he's still instilling them that dependency, that God is their God and he is going to be their provider and their sustainer instead of doing things on their own. And so God provided manna in the morning and quail at night. And so they ate manna the whole time. They ate manna and quail for like 40 years. But when they came to the borders of Canaan, this is another thing that I hadn't realized. It stopped. The manna was gone. And it was important for God to stop providing for them that way, so directly, so that Israel could receive God's provision through working of the land. And you see that trait of God the Father, taking care of his kids when they're children. They're in this desert. It's a hard time, so he's providing directly to them. But when there's provision of the land, there's land that they can grow food in, that they could grow cattle, that they could provide for themselves through work, that God is providing through them through their work. That's what God is doing, providing again a good work ethic. And I just think so, like this is a great illustration with children, right? We provide for them directly, but once they get a job, we give them more and more responsibility. Right now you have to pay for your own gas, you have to pay for your own in and out and your own movies, right? You have to pay for your own insurance. They're teaching them how to be independent, but the provision is coming from you, but in a way through their own work ethic as well. So just a side note, I thought that was really cool. So God provides for them. He is their sustainer. Amen. See you tomorrow. Remember, 5 minutes in the Word can change your life.